70 years of peace and prosperity. Supporters of the European project, and this includes almost all the established political parties and politicians in EU member states, continue to claim that these are among the glorious achievements of the EU. But the European Union doesn't have anything to do with peace or prosperity. And the idea that without the EU, our countries wouldn't be able to trade with one another, or that Portugal would have invaded Denmark, is ludicrous. The EU was never set up to promote peace or prosperity. Its real purposes are fundamentally different, and in this episode I will talk about them. First and foremost, the EU is about undermining national identities by promoting mass immigration, multiculturalism and regional subcultures. Secondly, the EU is about silencing democracies. And thirdly, it's about collectivizing our economies and submitting them to central planning, while creating a class of post-national bureaucrats that are loyal only to the European institutions and cannot be voted out of office by ballot box majorities. So let's have a closer look at each of these points. Firstly, the undermining of national identities. In a Europe of strong nation states, no usurpation of power by bureaucrats in Brussels could succeed. Therefore, the weakening of such national loyalties is at the very core of the European agenda. The EU does everything in its power to promote mass migration from Africa and the Middle East into our lands. It promotes multiculturalism and Islamic festive days, while simultaneously sponsoring regional subcultures, regional languages and even regional independence movements to undermine the nation state. Secondly, the silencing of democracies. The European Union usurps ever more power from its member states, thereby hollowing out democratic policy making on a national level. Monetary decision making has already been completely centralized for those countries unfortunate enough to have adopted the euro. Due to the vast differences within Europe and within the Eurozone in terms of culture, work ethic and financial policy, this monetary union requires continuous financial transfers from the north to the south. And this is not a bug, this is not a mistake, but an inherent feature aimed at creating not only a monetary union, but also, inevitably, a political union. Every now and then, of course, referendums show that national populations do not desire to live under European rule. Such referendums are then ignored, and the push for a continental super-bureaucracy continues. Thirdly, the collectivization of our economies. The EU attempts to create one huge and centralized economy in which multinational corporations can flourish. In a completely centralized, globalized, upscaled economy, locally based small businesses, of course, do not stand a chance. And instead of owning small businesses or working for businesses on a human scale, ordinary people so become dependent on big corporations, often increasingly so with flexible job contracts. And this constitutes, it's important to note, a fundamental break from the type of economy European countries used to have in the 20th century, which were based on small and medium-sized businesses. An economy largely based on big corporations is also an economy that's more easily managed and planned by the central government in Brussels. And as trading policies have become an exclusive EU competency, trade agreements with other nations have now turned out to be yet another means for the hollowing out of national sovereignty. And with these purposes in mind, the Eurocrats have, over the past decades, hollowed out our democracies, taken away our financial independence and our national currencies. They are taking our savings, diluting our national cultures and slowly crushing our small and medium-sized businesses by imposing legislation that primarily suits multinationals. In addition, the so-called High Representative, the would-be European Minister of Foreign Affairs, has been provoking Russia ceaselessly, while supporting the disastrous Iran deal until the very end. The European project is one colossal disaster. And the fact that the establishment has to rely on blatant falsehoods, such as peace and prosperity and ridiculous claims, truly tells us all we need to know about the lack of a legitimate reason for the EU to exist. So we must reject it and fight it and defend our freedom, our democracies, our national identities. We've got to return to economies largely shaped by small and medium-sized businesses, to democracies in which decision-making power is as decentralized as possible, closest to the people. And we've got to return to nation-states that can all be proud of their national history, that maintain their identities, and that cooperate with other nations in our European family in freedom, peace, and sovereignty. And that is why Brexit, the British decision to leave the EU, is the right decision and an example that every EU member state should follow. It's also why I'm fighting for an exit and why I hope you will share this video with as many people as you can.